Hey everyone, Temporal here. So we all know that Quad DPS can beat goats, but it's both a very map dependent and its purpose, at least in the most recent meta, was really more to force the opponent off of goats, so you could go goats and then have them swap onto goats second, giving you a significant advantage. What a few less people are aware of is that Quad DPS shifted at least temporarily towards a triple poke comp. So you were seeing double sniper, Widow plus either Hanzo or Ashe, and then pharmacy with Zen and either Hammond or Winston. Sometimes this was a map specific thing, but mostly this was a recognition that Quad DPS was overkill. Triple poke, at least on paper, seems like it should lose less hard to the dive comps that come out to counter Quad DPS, even if it doesn't melt goats quite as quickly as Quad DPS does. In practice, triple poke still loses quite hard to the same dive comps that counter quad DPS, as it simply can't peel for itself very well at all. So the only real advantage you were getting was you get to keep Zen's ult charge when transitioning to goats. That advantage being relatively minor and costing a bit of a speed loss on how quickly you take down goats, not a meaningful one, but a bit of one, meant that triple poke didn't get super widespread and it didn't hugely stick around, though you'll still see inklings of it here and there. The most important takeaway, though, from all this is that triple poke did work just fine for taking down goats. Now, keep in mind, it was generally doing this with Widow as its third DPS, and Widow isn't all that great against goats. Widow's inclusion in the comp really has more to do with her ability to fight other DPS or dive comps that come out as she can one-shot DPS heroes. That's really why she was so popular as part of the answer to most quad DPS comps. It's why you saw so much Widow Sombra, Widow Tracer, Widow Genji as answers to quad DPS. Now that's not to say Widow is useless against goats. She's definitely not. Crossfire is still powerful, and it contributes more towards the high DPS comp's win condition than an off-tank would. But there's no question that dropping her to bring Pharah, plus both of the other snipers, Hanzo and Ashe, would be better at fighting goats. They simply put out more damage, they're still capable of looking for those picks. Okay, so Widow is a downgrade against goats, but is still enough with a pharmacy and one of the other snipers to get brought anyway for her ability against the counter comps you are likely to see, or in case you both open some sort of high DPS count comp. So, why does that matter? Well, let's go ahead and downgrade that slot again. If we replace Widow with, say, Sombra, that in theory gives us worse poke still against goats. Does it really? That's debatable. The degree to which Sombra can enable her poke DPS comp's win conditions, both with threatening Rhine or D.Va with hacks, and with a little bit of point contest, it's quite possibly actually worth more into goats than being able to sometimes take a third sightline with your Widow. But even if Sombra is worse for the poke comp's win condition, it's very clearly not by much. Truthfully, I'm very confident that it's still enough against goats. It's on the current patch, and it works on a larger variety of points than triple poke does. If we want to crank up our anti-goats value in those remaining 3 slots, we're going to go ahead and bring out Hammond, Mercy, and Ana will do quite nicely. Hammond is, of course, our best solo tank and gets huge adaptive shields against goats. Mercy, that's going to enable our Pharah, easy pick there. And then Ana helps enable our Hammond a bit more, lets him take a few more swings through, sustain a little bit better as he's avoiding them, perhaps contesting a point, as well as bringing Anti-Nade and Sleep, which are both quite nice into goats. What does an optimal engagement into goats look like with this composition? Well, we are going to go ahead and start by having our Hammond swing high for a pile drive to avoid the bash or pin. And then as we're going through with that pile drive, we're also going to try and hit a hack on D.Va. As everyone gets sent up, toss TNT and a nade under the lifted goats comp so they fall onto it. And right after that TNT goes off, go ahead and split everyone up by dropping a concussive blast from Pharah into the middle of them. That's going to reduce the aura healing if you get them separated enough, and it's going to give you super easy cleanup on their team, as the Rhine Shield isn't protecting a lot of them. Your Ashe, your Pharah, your Sombra, your Hammond, everyone gets to look for nice, easy cleanup damage on those targets that have already been weakened and purpled. It's just beautiful. It's incredibly one-sided. Will this always work? No, of course not. There's definitely some counterplay, but even if the power play doesn't work, the comp still by far has all of the tools it needs to consistently take down goats, especially with Diva's nerfed Matrix. So that's great, but it brings us to the problem that its predecessors of Quad DPS and Triple Polecat. They just lose so darn hard to dive comps that come out to counter them, and they have to make a ton of hero swaps at that point. Well, the good news on that front is that simply having a flanker instead of 3 poke DPS makes the matchup into dive much less harsh. Dive is still favored, but the increase of your chance to win the fight against dive from triple poke to 2 pokes, 1 flanker is bigger than the increase from quad DPS to triple poke. That flanker instead of a 3rd poke DPS gives you a much better chance at peeling, lets you contest their backline, or even hit partial dives by coordinating with your Hammond. That would not be enough by itself to make me believe that this comp or something similar to it has a future as the answer for how to beat goats. What does make me think this has a future is that by just swapping Ana to Zen and Pharah to either Tracer or Diva, we now have Hammond plus Diva or Tracer, Ashe, Sombra, Mercy, Zen. If you take Diva, you've got Ashe, Sombra, Dive. That's not bad. Looks like a pretty viable poke dive comp, isn't particularly in trouble in any dive matchup, can play in a very similar style to the Owl Stage 2 Widow Tracer dive, and it's only going to be 2 swaps away from the anti-Goats comp that we were just on there. On the flip side, if Pharah swaps over to Tracer instead of Diva, the dive matchup might be harder. I'm personally still not sold that Diva is a full-time pick after the Matrix changes, but I don't need to die on that hill. You do still have very good tools, though, if you bring that Tracer and not the Diva. Mercy boosted Ashe, of course, one-shot headshots. Hammond can go ahead and play in a more peel style if necessary. That's not to say he can't go contest snipers, can't go do normal Hammond things, but since you don't have that main tank, he can look a little more to swing through his own backline, pile drive on top of his own backline as a counter dive measure, while your Sombra and Tracer can really do a lot of work just by themselves without a tank due to their paired one-clip assassination play. They don't really need him around. Now, that's not to say they'll never use him. It still works great to do 3-person dives. It works great to herd people around for the Ashe to hit mercy-boosted headshots on people as Tracer and Hammond shoo them into places. Lots of good synergy going on there. Personally, I like the Tracer version. Already talked about the whole not sold on Diva thing, and it actually leaves you in pretty good shape if the opponent tries to swap back into Goats. Diva doesn't contribute enough to the anti-Goats fight, and while Tracer is no Pharah, she does at least put some real damage pressure on them. Zen, of course, is no slouch into Goats either, and may even be better than Ana in the original comp if you're on offense and not consistently hitting your power play with that nade there. All of that means if the opponents try to swap into Goats, which is going to take them at least 3 swaps, you can probably win the next fight or two with the Tracer version with help from your ult economy advantage as you work your way back to Pharah and possibly Ana. Anyway, I know this was a little different than usual as it was part history lesson on Quad DPS, part walking you through a somewhat unproven comp. I should be clear there, actually. The anti-Goats portion, it just works. That's proven out. That works. You don't need to question that. But playing these swaps into dive requires a little more proving out, a little more work to make sure that that does in fact work the way I'm expecting to. Anyway, I was getting feedback that you guys were tired of Goats, so I went ahead and did this anti-Goats video, even if it's not proven out to the degree of things that I usually share. If you have questions or want to share your like or dislike of this type of video where things aren't 100% ironclad, yes, I'm sure this is how it works, let me know. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.